Hello and welcome back to the Enterprise Universe channel. Once again, joining us is Dr. James Stalker, entrepreneur, philosopher, scientist, engineer. And Dr. Stalker is going to continue today in discussing the basically the fundamentals of the enterprise architecture and some of the core principles that underpin what entrepreneurship means in the enterprise architecture context. So, Dr. Stalker, would you like to maybe just give for new viewers who haven't maybe first time joining the channel a quick overview of what the enterprise architecture is and what are some of the fundamental principles are?
Well, the enterprise universe, Eamon, thank you, is the superset of businesses, as I indicated before. And because it's a special purpose business, it has a special message also. And that purpose is what I call spreading goodness through innovation. So it kind of limits the scope too, even though we're talking about the universe, simply because it all has to tie to innovation. Obviously, innovation could come from many different angles, social, economic, and so forth. It just doesn't have to be all technical. And because of that, I think the scope increases. But nonetheless, we're not talking about everything else under the sun. It has to be tied to innovation and goodness and spreading globally. So that's really what we talked about. But I want to kind of talk about the building blocks of an entrepreneur. Okay, these are the 9 fundamentals. The other day when we talked, you mentioned about whether that's going to do anything to do with the leadership. It really is not about leadership, but these are the building blocks of the framework that you need as an entrepreneur to be successful. Okay, so the leadership, I will come back later on to that point down the road.
Just one question, and I apologize for maybe slowing things down a little bit, but a fundamental, what does the word fundamental, what do you mean by the word fundamental? A fundamental principle, a fundamental philosophical building block? I just want to get the 9 fundamentals. You use the 9 fundamentals, and I know I probably should have asked this previously, but can you just describe a little bit about what a fundamental is and what that word might mean in this context?
That's a great question, Eamon. So when I say fundamentals, they are somewhat independent of one another. They could be a block on its own without having to depend on something else. So they're not duplicating some other block, but together, these 9 blocks make it so powerful for the entrepreneur. By practicing all of them together really is what makes it powerful. So in other words, one fundamental is not going to take on the scope of another fundamental because they're somewhat independent. So that's really what I mean by fundamentals.
And this was something that I kind of had to get clarity on the last time, which is, and they're really focused on the individual, we're not necessarily talking about, although they could be construed as fundamentals for enterprises. They are different to like vision, mission, in that they are personal. They are personal to the entrepreneur. They are things that apply to them as an individual. And they also have, by extension, applications to the company. But I just wanted to make sure that I understood that, like, if the enterprise universe is the entity you're creating, these fundamentals are coming from James Stalker, and then you're applying them to your entity. Is that a true statement?
Absolutely correct, Eamon. So as the founder, a CEO of the enterprise universe, I'm an entrepreneur first and foremost. That's really how and where I spent a lot of my time before I actually incorporated the enterprise universe. So the enterprise universe is getting the fundamentals I developed as an entrepreneur. Okay, so I'm shaping the enterprise universe in my image, essentially. Okay, so as an entrepreneur, I'm giving the character the company needs going forward. But that doesn't mean that everyone out there an entrepreneur doesn't have to follow the same blocks that I have. I mean, in other words, you could define your own purpose. You could define your own vision. You could define your own pathways, so long as you're defining them for yourself or for your organization as an entrepreneur. So we're not really prescribing what the enterprise universe does. It does it because of what I want it to do as an entrepreneur. That's my special purpose, and I'm giving it to that. But in addition to that, I want to have these fundamentals utilized by other entrepreneurs in their own way. They don't have to follow anything to do with what the enterprise universe does. But when they do follow these building blocks of the framework for success, then their business is going to really shine too, just like the enterprise universe. So that's a good distinction that we're making.
Great. And I think that also answers the question why I think it's somewhat related to philosophy, because it's coming from the individual. And I also think it's why it's kind of got some universal applicability, not just an entrepreneurial applicability, frankly, because these are probably things that are true. If you wanted to become a great sportsman person, for example, I think it probably would have a similar. I think these fundamentals are probably applicable beyond the realms of business. Would be my thought.
It is true, absolutely, because although I don't want to explicitly say this is useful to everyone,
Yeah.
but it is implicitly useful to non-business people too. But my blocks as the framework for success is laid out specifically for entrepreneurs.
Right.
But
So
we're,
can we?
but
So
we're
can
still,
we? Right. Yeah.
but we're
Sorry.
still saying that those blocks are defined for your own business the way you see fit. It doesn't have anything to do with the purpose that we have within the enterprise universe. Again, it ties back to my philosophy as we talked about. So an individual with their own philosophy would define a purpose and the rest of the blocks for their business.
Right. And I think just to bring it full circle, um, we essentially why this is relevant is because what you're basically saying is that all entrepreneurs should go through the exercise of adapting and embracing their set of fundamentals, and it's a precondition, if you will. And maybe we can now pivot over to just a quick recap of the few fundamentals that we've already talked about, and then we can have a quick chat maybe of some more, because I believe we've talked to date about 3 fundamentals.
Yeah, so far, Eamon, we talked about purpose, which
Yeah.
is really the cornerstone of all of the 9. And then, of course, it should be guided by your personal philosophy.
Yeah.
And then we talked about vision, meaning where you want to take your business in the next 5 years, 10 years, and make it a concrete idea instead of an abstract idea, meaning put a number on it, whether in terms of number of employees or revenue or whatever that you think is your vision, but have a number on it. And then define pathways to get to that vision. When you put the constraints of the vision and the purpose, your pathways are not many as you would think. They are actually constrained now. There are half a dozen or so pathways in this vast amount of pathways out there. So you're essentially bringing that focus based on the purpose and the vision is aligned with your purpose and then your pathways. So I not only gave the examples for others to follow, but I also gave them what my purpose is, what my vision is, what my pathways are for the enterprise universe, only as an example for them, not to follow, not to push on anyone. They could really choose whatever they want to, but unless they have these 9 fundamentals in totality to work together, they're going to be struggling. They may be making money, they may be making some contracts here and there, but in the end, they're not going to reach their overall goal simply because that goal is not clear to them to start with.
Right. So maybe we can then, just to focus in then on the next fundamental. So if on the assumption that I have gotten to the point of thinking about my path, what would be the next thing I need to start thinking about after thinking about my pathway?
Okay, so once you really get through these three,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to tell you that I'm also offering these seminars and workshops for other entrepreneurs, in addition to bringing them the awareness of the enterprise universe, the superset of businesses globally. But I'm offering them seminars and workshops so they can understand more about this, because these look like simple ideas, but they're very difficult to implement. So the next comes in that, Eamon, what I call recipe for success.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a purpose and a vision for it and defined pathways, but what type of recipe do you need to make your business a success? So I define three ingredients essentially for success. So those three ingredients are, if you talk about any type of business out there, they need technology development expertise, business development expertise, and financial resources. Those are the three ingredients I see for any business to succeed. But
So one of the things there, so you like just you don't think in terms of labor per se. You think in terms of, like, I'm just trying to contrast that with other ways of thinking about it. Uh, Business expertise. What can you really talk a little bit about what you mean by expertise? And because like that's, I think there's probably more to that word than just can you just give me a little bit more on that, just so I can
okay, so
connect?
again, Eamon, I'm not really talking about non-human factors here.
Okay,
So
so
when
you're
I
talking
say
about yourself
technology,
again. We're back
yeah,
to that.
it's
It's
again
kind of talking
humans.
about I, as the entrepreneur, have to have business, financial, and so you're back to the internal out. So I've fallen into that trap again.
No, yeah, you
Yeah,
are. So it's, I'm
yeah.
not talking about non-business, non-human factors here.
Okay,
So
it's
these,
all about okay.
yeah, these three ingredients, technology development expertise, business development expertise, and financial resources. What I mean by that is if you have a business that has 100 people, okay, 100 employees or C-level executives and so forth, so it's just total 100 people. If you take them apart and say who is doing what, and if you put them in three different buckets, technology bucket, business development bucket, and financial resources bucket, that is your recipe. Okay, so if
Right.
you have of the 100 people, in my case, within the enterprise universe, because it's a technology heavy company, I would have 50 people in the technology bucket, 30 people in the business development bucket, and then 20 people in the financial resources bucket, where they may be looking at revenue or investments or
Yeah.
loans and
Yeah.
things like that, but they're focusing on the financial resources part. And the business development people are looking at marketing and sales and outreach and all of that. That comes into that bucket. And then the technology bucket, which is really heavy in my world within the enterprise universe, these technologies are IT people,
Mhm.
electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, scientists, computer scientists. These are all in that bucket. Okay,
Mhm.
they're doing various things like hardware development, software development, integration, and so forth. But that recipe for me, 50, 30, and 20, is not the same for some other business. If you have a business that's, let's say you are starting a bank, as an example, so your bucket looks different for the recipe, right? It is financial resources being the top bucket for you, maybe even 60% there, maybe 20% in the business development, and then another 20%, the rest in the technology development.
I think we're at a kind of a strange pace in history, though, where it I think we had a chat about this where like the oil companies are 3% of the S&P, and I think all of the oil companies added together don't add up to what Apple is worth right now. And I know that Apple is not just a technology company; it's a marketing company, and we could argue how much Apple is actually a technology company. But I think it speaks to the fact that so much of the future is it feels to me like technology is really approaching a tipping point in terms of it's starting to really drive the human activity in a way that I guess we to a extent we haven't seen since the Industrial Revolution. You know, it's like technology drove a societal shift at the Industrial Revolution. It feels like we're almost at that stage again. And do you agree that to some extent that maybe the enterprise universe is a symptom of of a new leap in technology? I don't want to take us off track, but there's you've got such an emphasis on technology. You must have a an opinion as to the importance of technology and the role of technology in society.
Yeah, I think technology, as we understand from other people, Eamon,
Mhm.
they have kind of unhinged themselves from human beings. So
Right.
they actually think human beings are an afterthought or more like a customer, but they don't think of them as part of the technology itself. Okay, so you need to kind of think about human beings as the focus of any technology breakthrough. I told you technology breakthrough is not the end goal. Okay,
Right.
it is a goal to make your customers' lives better, or your stakeholders better, or your competitors better. So you have to always draw that back to the focus back to the humans. And that's missing in the technology revolution that we see today because they unhinge that from the human beings.
And I'd go so far as to say that it reminds me of it's kind of a materialistic disconnection of the human center from the instrument, if you will. Like there's this age-old, um, the handyman versus, it's like the tool, and now we're looking at ourselves like we're tools, like we are objects to each other. And I think this idea of having human-centered technology is a break with the materialistic non-human technology that frankly is kind of a little bit scary, in terms of the fact that I don't feel like we're in control of technology anymore, because for the very reason that it's not subject to humanity, it almost feels like that it's got a life of its own. I don't know if you're suggesting we can actually get back in control of technology through this, through what you're suggesting, by putting the human back in the middle of it.
We absolutely do, and we will be able to do it. Technology as we know it is only developed for human consumption. We should never forget that fact. And just because you are able to manage your consumers to do things through your technology, that doesn't mean your focus should be the technology itself. That technology is only a means to an end. The end is to make your customers' lives better. Nobody is going to have robots as their clients, customers. Let's face that. Customers are always going to be human beings, and you're developing robots and technologies to make their lives better, even to the extent where human beings may never have to work again.
Mm.
The universal basic income could be achieved through certain technologies, but always think about the reason why you're developing this. It is for the humans, not for the robots and computers and so forth. So that's really the disconnect that we see today. And I
Right.
don't want that to be the case within the enterprise universe.
And I think one has to, some of what you're saying is that has to be internalized by the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur can't have it can't have a like a hands-off relationship with technology. He needs to understand it as a human-centered activity versus Skynet to use, kind of like the robots are coming, as you said, because it does feel to me that philosophically, again, some of our greatest entrepreneurs today seem to be enamored with this kind of materialistic view of reality, which is somewhat frightening, to be honest.
I,
Whether it's robotic weapons or self-driving cars or whatever, it feels like we're kind of heading down that road without much thought. At least that's the perception I get.
I think you're on the right path there, Eamon, and that's one of the things I want to change within the enterprise universe. The purpose has to be defined clearly for you to engage in a business. And if you use technology to provide better products for your customers, that's well and good. If it's only going to serve your purpose, your self satisfaction, then you really want to be an individual, not as an entrepreneur. Because when you are a business person, you are saying, I want to create something for my consumer, my customer. That's really why you are in it, not because you want to make a lot of money or you want to splash this and that. That's really not the reason. You are in it to make your customers' lives better. And if you use technology for it, that's good because let's face it, Eamon, there is a reason why this thing really started, right? So computers replaced people. They're doing faster things. They could get more data analyzed and so forth. But that's because humans have written the programs. If you look at it that way. So the creators of these technologies are human beings, and they're only as good as the human beings could do.
Mm.
And that's why you need to nurture that ability within human beings who are creating these technologies, not the other way around. Of course, you could use technology to help and better our lives. That's fine. But I think technologies have forgotten because I can use 1,000 computers and I only need 2 human beings. I'm thinking the technology is more important than the 2 human beings I'm using. But as a business person, you are in the business to use 1,000 computers to make your consumers' lives better. You should never forget that part, the last
So,
part.
so you're back to the linking of the while you said the fundamentals stand alone, they are still linked back to the mission or to the vision and the purpose of because if you don't have the vision and the purpose, you end up with a recipe that can get off track. It feels like, and it's funny. It is interesting. I wonder if we when later on maybe we can interview some entrepreneurs and ask them what their vision, mission, version, purpose. I think it'll be interesting to see what they have to say and the degree to which they are actually conscious of these things.
I would
Because it'll
I
be
would
interesting.
say even most of them probably would give you a blank
Right.
a stare, right? Because they really do not have that. And
Right.
that's the reason why this is so important because you should not ever forget why you're in business and you're using technology to achieve the goals. You're using business development to achieve the goals. You're using financial resources to achieve your goals. But what is your goal? The
And I
goal
think
is
most
not to
entrepreneurs
success.
obsess around we tend to obsess around the financial and the technology these days, it feels like, because there's this loop of I've got a secret sauce and I can get gazillions of dollars for it. And I can be a god of Silicon Valley. And I think we lose the centeredness or the connection back there. And I think the business acumen uh, is obviously very important, but it does seem like that's the Silicon Valley. The reason for the Silicon Valley works is because there's those three ingredients in the one place. There's money, there's business people, and there's technologists all in the one place. And that seems to create what, at least it seems to me, the Silicon Valley phenomenon to some extent, unconscious as it might be, but there's no doubt that those three ingredients are fuel for a successful business.
And I will tell you this too, Eamon. If they define success based on the fundamental of the purpose, then those ingredients would have to be rethought for each and every company. So, for example, if you've got 100 people, just pick randomly 100 people from one business and put them into three separate buckets. Okay, business development people, technology development people, and financial resources. That would be your recipe for success. And then you have to ask, is this recipe good for my success, not financially speaking alone, but the purpose achieving ability?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's why they need to
Yeah.
rethought of this recipe for success. That's really what I mean by it. So without the purpose and vision, and without the proper recipe, think of it as an untethered kite. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
it could reach really higher heights, but you would never know where it's going to end up. Okay.
Which is why we end up with all these kind of ethical issues with, like, for example, with Apple, stories of slave factories more or less in China where people aren't being. So how do you reconcile these things? And it's like, I think it's very difficult for us as humans to be consistent. And the same thing with Amazon. How can Amazon, how I find it difficult to reconcile the image of Amazon and Amazon Web Services and sending men to the moon with basically forcing people to go to a sweatshop during a coronavirus pandemic and not giving them PPE. It's hard. And I think, like, I don't want to apportion, but it just feels like there's disconnects there. It feels like there's a lack of consistency somehow. How
Yeah,
much how much is the extra $10 a phone worth? Not to treat the workers a little bit better. Where's the line where you lose touch with purpose and you're out of whack, and that's it feels to me like that's like we shouldn't have to be looking at the newspaper to basically, surely that should be internally driven. You shouldn't have to have a policeman telling you to do these things.
absolutely. Remember, Eamon, what I told you in the beginning of our sessions. Uh,
Yeah.
in our beginning sessions, I said one of the most difficult things for an entrepreneur is to be able to say no to something when it does
Yes.
not
Right.
gel with your purpose. And I didn't say that just lightly. That's very, very difficult for entrepreneurs because they're short-sighted, they're trying to achieve some things, they're under pressure, their stakeholders, their investors are pressuring them. There's a lot of reasons why they do that.
It's not easy, is
But
what you're saying.
it's not easy. But if you are a strong leader and
Hmm.
your purpose is really important for you to take it to the next level, and that's the reason why you're in it, it's so easy for me to say it, even if some people think I'm ridiculous because I'm walking away from this $5 million coal plant the other day, as I was saying. Even though that fulfills my vision, it does not align with my purpose.
And of course, there's also the other side of the foot is that there's the personal responsibility side of this as well. So everybody has to embrace, but at the same time, I think it's I don't know. It feels like, at least to me, that it's we got this two-way street of you know responsibility going both ways, and there tends to be when the relationship is breaking, it feels like, because on both sides perhaps we don't have the bonds, and the commitment, whether it's, so I don't know, it's challenging, and I think we have to all internalize these ideas, Dr. Stalker. I don't think it's very easy.
And
No.
internalization, Eamon, as you said, is such an important aspect for any entrepreneur. And I tell you this too, some of the big companies that you mentioned, I don't have to get into any of them, but they have been handed over by others who started with the vision and so forth. So the original entrepreneurs are not there to shape
Right.
it. That's there. I mean,
And perhaps, someone from those companies could come here and prove me wrong. It's just the perception right now is that there's a disconnect. My perception, at least, is that there's something of a disconnect between perhaps values and actions as it relates to, even companies that are immensely successful and immensely rich, not necessarily, at least the perception is it doesn't feel like it's necessarily, connecting all the dots.
and that's
Bottom.
absolutely true, Amen. And I'll tell you this: if you really want to help somebody change their ways of doing business, like what we're trying to do within the enterprise universe, the best way to do that is to set an example. We could say all good things all day long.
Yeah,
That's really
talk is
not going
cheap.
to work. We
Yeah,
have to set an example. And that's when real things are going to start happening. And that's really what my goal is, one of the many goals I have for the enterprise universe.
yeah, and like I'm like most people, victims of a certain amount of judgment. It's easy to be judgmental when you're not in the hot seat. However, I think unless we hold ourselves accountable by having these kind of internal rules that you're speaking to, we're not going to hold ourselves like forget about anybody else, mate. It's on us. It's on me. It's my life. It's my experience. It's up to me to hold myself accountable. And if I don't have these rails for myself, I I can be pretty dishonest with myself. It's like it's easy to dance, but when the you know but I also think that I wouldn't like consciousness is a function of having putting the light on it. So by I think your principles are about turning a light on for yourself. It's kind of like the entrepreneur's light, and then the entrepreneur has no has to it's a big, as we said at the very beginning, it's a responsibility. I said I don't want to do these principles because that's a lot of responsibility. That's used like a lot of work. I'm going to be on the hook to myself now because I actually have said I have a purpose. I can just
But
basically go with the wind if it's like this is a so it's like
Eamon, there's an easier solution for all this. Nobody's asking you to be an entrepreneur.
yeah.
You could be just a regular Joe and live your life and have fun and accumulate
But
things for yourself.
you're saying though that there's a big moral responsibility associated with being an entrepreneur. It's like it's not a it's a especially in this age of hyper technologizing, it's a big, perhaps now, as I said, I kind of feel that like, if we're in England in Cornwall in like 1795 and we're talking about building a steam plant or something, we're having a huge potential impact on the world, right?
Yeah.
This feels like another one of those times where what seemingly are small events can actually have huge implications,
And
especially when you're looking at technologies like your own that have potentially global implications, and in the wrong hands, they're lethal.
and I tell you what, Eamon. So when technology is pursued for its own sake,
Hmm.
that's where problems happen. You really have to tie it back to why you're developing it, why you're in business, what is your purpose. Those are some of the things that need to be fundamentally understood before you start pursuing technology.
Right.
The technology is really not the end goal.
I
To
actually
somebody,
just yeah.
somebody like me, Eamon,
Mhm.
if I were to just pursue technology alone as a madman, I would be coming up with changing ideas every 2 weeks.
Right.
But that's really not what drives me. I want to tie it back to the purpose and why we're doing it, why we're trying to better the world in terms of human beings.
Well, I don't know if you've seen this, but there people have made the analogy between magic and technology. So in other words, black magic is essentially ignorant technology. So it's technology for selfish, it's kind of like manipulating nature for selfish reasons, versus white magic is when you link it to purpose. But technology is it's kind of like magic in the sense that there's a black magic and a white magic. Is kind of like, you can be a wizard of unconscious technology, or you can be a wizard of conscious technology, and you will gain wizardly powers with technology, but it may not be going anywhere good in terms of a human outcome. Or you can basically start out to be a white wizard, and basically, and I know that's, but I think there is some truth, to, like, advanced technology does look like magic to a lot of us.
Yeah, I don't really pay attention to magic simply because it's a
It's an analogy. It's an analogy.
I know, I understand. I think it's a manipulation of your senses and try
Yeah.
to kind of you know uh, make you miss some things. That's what magic is about. We're not talking about that. We should never, ever, ever make your customers, go with something that you have developed when they don't really need it. It's
Right.
your responsibility to tell them exactly why you're developing it, even if they crave for it. You have to say, no, this is going to get you addicted, and that's why you should not use it. At least I'm not going to develop it because my conscience does not allow me to develop it. That's the kind of thing that we have to have as entrepreneurs to make this a better world.
Right. And I wonder how much it's not even people. I'm not sure people set out for their technologies to have negative impacts. It's just that's how it turns out. And it's almost like an errors of omission. Does that make any sense? Well, I think they, I'm not sure, I'm not sure the degree to which some technologies, they kind of like they run away on you. You know what I'm saying? Technology is a dangerous thing. They can get ahead of you, and like, so in other words, you may not have intended that your technology be used to start some kind of a revolution or be used by neo Nazis or something, but that's what happens.
I
So
think two
it's like,
two
yeah,
things. There are lots of factors why the status of our technology and our society is, but I think I point out two things. Well, maybe three, but repeated tasks have been performed by computers.
yeah,
So when a business person thinks all they have to do is get more computers and nothing else, forgetting about the human beings that wrote the programs and so forth, that really is one of the fundamental issues. The other one I see, Eamon, is this celebrity mentality. Like, somebody came up with some technology and you have to celebrate them as heroes
yes,
without actually having done anything toward humanity. I think that's really something that I believe is a fundamental problem that I see. And the third one I would say is the the advertising, online advertising, radio advertising, just about advertising everything to make people buy what you have, then understand what they need and then make those things. So there's a subtle
sure,
distinction, but it's really a great distinction that one has to understand. You don't make something and push it on to people to buy them through online ads and other types of ads to no end without understanding why you created that product in the first place. Okay, that's another thing that I see. Those are the three major problems I see in our society globally now, and technology is, of course, making it much easier for people to do in terms of using more computers, more automation, and this Hollywood thing, the celebrity status, and whatever that we think it is, that's making people dumber in my view
mhm,
because they don't have to watch all these things that are being put out there, and that's because they are preparing people to buy more stuff
right.
that
So
they
it's kind
need.
of the celebrity culture, the the ads, the manipulation of the ads around wants versus needs, and then the automation, the non-human centered automation paradigm. And it's like and I think that's very true. It's very scary, the non-human automated. All three are scary to me, because we see we see like I think all of those three are very scary things right now, and as you say, they feed into unconscious behavior versus conscious behavior. It feels like it's very much about manipulating the unconscious rather than awakening the conscious, if that makes any sense.
Well, absolutely. In the olden days, Eamon, there were a few vehicles that people used to manipulate others, like the religion and sects and racial divide and all of that. That used to be the case, but now we have other things
Mhm.
that we're using. Automation is one of them, and this celebrity mentality is another one that we see.
I I
And,
do feel that a fundamental of that though is seeing them as things, not people. I think if we see people as people, we may not do these things, but I think we tend to objectify ourselves and others. And as it's like I hate to get into this kind of maybe we can talk about this being, and I think this is know thyself, which is probably one of your later, I know that's one of your later fundamentals. But if you think of yourself as a machine, you're going to be more likely to think of others as machines versus I think of myself as a human being, like being, I'm a human being, not a human machine. And I think that could potentially be a change. At least I fear that we're losing sight of who we are, and that's part of the reason this happens is because we're not centered, if you will, on our being. Um, I
I
know that's a term that's hard to define, but I think I'm trying to get across it's a pretty human centric or valuing the being aspect of us.
Well, I tell you this, Eamon. I never in my life consider myself as a thing.
Hmm.
Never, never concern myself as a thing that somebody could replace with a computer. I never thought of that. That's, I think, nearly impossible to do. But I think anybody, any human being could have the same uniqueness if they put their mind to.
Hmm.
Okay. So that's why I think the other fundamental that I'm going to talk about, which is probably one of the major blocks of this framework for success, and that is know thyself.
Right.
So I will get into that. But you're right. There are some problems.
Mm.
And one point I
And
want to make.
opportunities, but great opportunities by awakening, because I see all your fundamentals being as essentially focused on having awake and aware and conscious entrepreneurs as being a really important fundamental of getting things right because you're focusing on the person.
You know something else, Eamon, and this might come to you as a shock. I would not be able to do any other way.
Right.
I could not
Right.
even think of doing in any other way. I can't consider myself a thing. I never treat people as things, and I don't get carried away by this computing and technology and things like that because I'll always see the bottom lines,
But that's
and people don't
partly
have the
back to this,
ability to see the bottom lines.
but there's a lot of confusion out there, and I know that's part of another conversation we need to have. But I don't feel I don't like not everybody is I feel that not that uh, and I'm not sure what the root cause of it is, but it is a kind of a psychological disorder that we have about if we treat ourselves like things and we treat others like things, I see that behavior. So therefore, I presume that's how people are thinking about themselves. It's
And
like I guess I am not them, but the evidence I see is that there's a lot of objectification going on, material, treating people like material things, and people talking about themselves as material things versus being centered things.
And in a society like that, Eamon, it's easy for humans to be replaced by a robot.
Machines. Yes.
It's very, very easy when people think they have nothing unique to them, and everything that they do is repeated by a computer or a program. If you believe that, then yes, computers are going to replace you, but you have so many things that you could be so unique about. It's nearly impossible for another human being to write a program to mimic you completely. So that's something that people don't understand. And I want to make sure they understand that, because that's really where we have to go. Not this thing where you have this battle or wars about who is better in technology, who is making a lot of money, who
Yeah.
cares about all of that when you really untie yourself from, or untether yourself from, the purpose.
Right. Great. Well, it looks like we've hit our time. We've gone a little bit over today, Dr. Stalker. So, but there was so much to talk about. I felt like hopefully the viewers will get a lot of value out of the 15 minutes. Uh, I guess next time we're going to talk about know thyself. Is that the next
I
stop on
think
our
know thyself is a session in itself,
yeah,
Eamon,
right.
and it ties to confusion, why people are confused, what they do when they're confused, and what to do about it. Those are
Right.
some of the things I will be touching on in our next session.
Well, I'm super excited, and maybe sometimes I get tied up with some of my analogies around magic and stuff. Might not actually hit the mark, but super excited about the conversation, and I'm learning a lot as we go through this, Dr. Stalker, and I'm excited about picking up the conversation on our next chat.
Oh, absolutely, Eamon. I like all of your questions, because this is really how we're going to make sure our ideas are going to be encapsulated and clearly for all of the other folks. Again, the hard work is still ahead of us. Just talking about is not going to get the job done. We have to live up to it.
We got to play some football as well here.
Yeah.
But it's awesome. Thanks so much, Dr.
Thank,
Stalker.
thank you.